at settling peacefully the conflict in the Donbass. But we even heard from former Chancellor Merkel, oh, we didn't really mean that. We weren't really going to guarantee that. That was bad faith. That was to give Ukraine time to arm. She actually said that a couple of weeks ago. We had agreement for peace, but was it a fake by the US and Ukraine and Germany to rearm? Or was it real? We need something real this time, not something fake. And similarly with Crimea, what Yanukovych was proposing was a long-term lease arrangement for Russia and Ukraine in Crimea, because after all, Russia's had its naval fleet in Sevastopol since 1783. And then every day now Zelensky says, oh, we're going to chase them out of Crimea. Yeah, over all of our dead bodies. Let's stop this nonsense, this childishness. The whole world's survival is at stake. And this rhetoric is so reckless of these leaders, these so-called leaders, these politicians, who think that they, with bravado, that they can say anything. But what they're doing is driving us closer to nuclear war. So we need compromises like the Minsk Agreement, like a long-term arrangement for Crimea, and especially for the two nuclear superpowers to back off and stop this reckless NATO enlargement, which was a lie from the beginning, a violation of agreements made to President Gorbachev all the way back in 1990, and hopelessly provocative and dangerous. And that is the key to getting a world back to some protection and some hope for survival. So thank you very much. We need your voices everywhere in every country, for governments to stand up clearly at the United Nations and in every other forum to say, stop this war now, stop the escalation, stop the bravado, stop the hate talk, and sit down and negotiate a peace that respects the security interests of all of the parties, and stop the military expansion. This is the root of this war. Most of the world, and I should be more clear, most of the world's governments clearly want peace and are neutral in this conflict between the US and Russia. It's when this war, the war of 2022, exploded in February last year. The US and Europe said, okay, the whole world's aligned against Russian aggression. Well, actually, it wasn't like that. The vast majority of the world's governments said, stop the fighting. We don't take sides. We don't join your sanctions. We don't view this as a one-sided affair. China, for example, very responsibly said, negotiate, but respect the security interests of all sides. What that meant was the NATO question. And around the world, most governments did not impose sanctions on Russia. They said, we want an end to the war. We are neither Russia haters nor Ukraine haters. We want the two sides to negotiate. So practically speaking, China, Brazil, India, South Africa, the so-called BRICS countries, together with Russia, those countries are major voices for peace and negotiation, and they should continue to say very clearly that their vision is not to side with one side or the other side, but to side with negotiation and peace. And India has a special role to play. Not only is it a great country and a civilization and 1.4 billion people, but it's the presidency of the G20 this year. And so India has plenty of opportunity to push hard for peace and negotiations. Brazil will host the G20 next year. President Lula is very clear that what is needed right now is not military victory on the battlefield. This is a reckless illusion. What is needed is negotiations and an end to the NATO enlargement. And Brazil will be president of the G20 next year. South Africa, which has said the same, will be president of the G20 in 2025. So I believe that these countries have a huge role to play. I think the African Union should make a strong statement that Africa is being endangered by this war. Africa views this war as a tragedy and an unnecessary one, and as a solvable one as well. So the African Union, I believe, should stand up and be clear. This is the time for peace and for negotiations. Turkey, in my mind, gets a special commendation because President Erdogan has worked very hard during the past year, and his very skillful foreign ministry has worked hard to try to mediate between the two sides. It's not easy to do, but of course, Turkey knows the Black Sea area very well indeed, and should be able to play a very important role. But I would say there's not a government in the world that can't contribute to the momentum of demand for negotiations by saying to the big powers, we do not agree with the approach of winning on the battlefield, because that endangers the whole world. Of course, first and foremost, Ukraine, but actually the entire world with nuclear war. And we demand, therefore, a negotiation now. How can they even think to send tanks right now without even mentioning the word negotiations? Shame on them, shame. This is definitely in part the corruption of our political processes. I can speak about the United States. The U.S. is a government for hire. Our political system is organized around campaign contributions, where lobbyists and major campaign contributors spend billions of dollars, and by doing so, essentially buy the policies of the U.S. government. And I have no doubt that the big campaign contributors have played a role in this war. And because what I can tell you is this is not a war that is popular among the U.S. public, or these neocon ideas are not popular or not demanded by the public, even with all the propaganda we receive from the U.S. government. The public is very skeptical. This is a policy in the U.S. driven by a small group of people that have the hands-on levers of power. And so it is not democracy that has brought us to war. It is the corruption of our political institutions. I couldn't agree more. I think that is why our voices are so important, especially with the mainstream media unwilling, unable, I don't understand it, but absolutely not doing their job of holding government to account, but just the opposite, just becoming megaphones for government propaganda. The New York Times, the Washington Post, useless. All they do is report what senior officials say, even unnamed senior officials, as if these newspapers forgot what their role is in a democracy, which is to doubt the government, to probe, to investigate. They don't even do that anymore. It's pathetic. And so this is a very important reason for this call and for the peace movement to call out this small group that manipulates our governments and that in the end creates threats to all of humanity. On the Vatican plan, we had or not plan, I should say, but the meeting, we had a very good meeting. I can tell you the United States government and government of Ukraine and others were very unhappy in general about any calls for negotiations. This is incredible to me. They have a way of, we've gone a whole year without any negotiations. Shock, and especially we went a whole year without Biden speaking with Putin once. So this is what makes this difficult. The governments, I mean, these governments, these belligerents in the hands of these neocons don't want to talk, and they try to beat down anything we say, and the media beat down the mainstream media beat down the message, though the message is getting through more and more because it's the official narratives are so phony and so much propaganda that more and more channels are finding ways to see the truth. And I think that that's an important development. So I'm trying to think of every way to amplify what we're saying and doing, and I'm open to all suggestions. We need public meetings, we need online meetings, we need leaders that are ready to go against the official narratives, to be speaking out. There have been a number of generals in Germany recently who have said how reckless all of this is and how phony it is and how dangerous it is for Ukraine. And that's very important to hear more of those voices. The government of Mexico, I know, has been pursuing the idea of peace commission and high-level peace. And I think being very practical right now of not only peace in principle or in general, but peace in Ukraine would be very helpful and timely. And if AMLO, the president of Mexico, and President Lula, for example, within the Americas work together, there are many other like-minded leaders in the Americas. And the Americas, the countries of Latin America, could speak out very, very clearly. It would put the U.S., it would force the U.S. to listen. This is important. The neocons get away with it if they dominate the narrative. But if other governments are saying, no, that is dangerous, that's wrong, then they can't dominate the narrative. And so this is why it's so important for governments like Mexico, which is also a member of the G20, to speak out clearly. And for like-minded countries that are not, and let me put it this way, not part of the US alliance, and that means that outside of NATO, outside of the US military alliance in Asia, the rest of the world, that's the vast majority of countries, those countries have to say, we are on neither side, we are for peace, and to be very clear about that.